You're all set? All right, everyone, we're going to get started. If Harvey's not in his seat in 5 seconds, he's going to have to get kicked off the SAG. I'm joking. It's July. It's supposed to be a light meeting. Welcome to the 56th SAG meeting in this process, everyone. Thank you for being here in July. I know many of you were like, are we really meeting in July? And yes, we are, but only one time. So thanks for being here. A few logistics before we get started. Water is on the way. That was not an attempt to dry your palates and have no one talk, I swear. So water's on its way. For parking, again, if you park downstairs and you haven't gotten validated yet, when we take our first break, please go get validated in the back. And translation services for anyone who may need them are available in the back.
Good evening, everyone. And if anybody needs Spanish translation, we're in the back. We have equipment, and you're welcome to come in the back. Buenas noches a todos. Si hay alguien que necesita servicios de interpretación, nosotros podemos facilitarle el equipo y ayudarle.
Thank you. So we're going to move the agenda around a little bit just because of an illness, and I'm going to hand it off to Dave to go through that, and then I'll come back at the end of the night and kind of talk about one of the solution groups is going to be meeting tomorrow, and then our meeting on August 19th. Oh, thank you for reminding me. And I need to get a formal recommendation and approval from you guys for the meeting minutes from last month. So anyone want to recommend approval?
Move to approve.
Right, thank you very much. Anyone opposed to approving the meeting minutes? Kathy?
I wasn't there.
Do they say that you were there?
They don't say anything, that I'm not under absent, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, we will add Kathy Sutherland's absence to that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being so honest.
Oh, you're welcome. I don't want extra credit.
Sure you don't. All right. Okay, with that, all approved? Aye?
Abstain.
Abstain? Okay. All right, we're going to get started then.
Thank you, Lee. And I just want to remind you on that note, I think a couple times, at least the last meeting, we noticed that there's a couple names that were marked absent. I think that's because as the name sheet is going around, everyone hasn't had a chance to sign it. So if you could please just remember to sign that before you leave, that would help us out a lot. Yes, Harvey?
And I think Andrew Tubbs was here for you.
Okay, good catch, Harvey. We'll add Andrew on there. Okay, so as Lee mentioned, this is our agenda for tonight. We are going to do a quick review of summary notes as usual, give you a quick update on engagement process, and the TED Talk that we did have planned, as Lee mentioned, is not going to happen tonight. Most likely will happen the next meeting. It probably will have some connection to housing and jobs, which we're going to do a report back on, so that will work out well. We're going to do a report back on these 3 topics you see here: parks, public space, sustainability, and neighborhood quality of life, transportation access and traffic, and land use and urban design. And Kim, Bill, and Matt, who you'll meet shortly, will be doing those presentations, but we really want that to be more of a discussion for you all, so we'll make sure we leave plenty of time to discuss what came out of those discussions with the solution groups, and then we have public comment as usual and the upcoming meeting schedule. SOG agreements, I'm not going to go over these again because you all again have been fantastic, but just remember to stay open-minded, be respectful, and have fun. So, quick review of the last SOG meeting just to make sure we got all right. As you all know, the focus of that meeting was mainly about the TED Talks. We had many SOG members present their mission, fears, and aspirations. Much focus was on housing, as we kind of expected, and we did have a discussion about that. Other topics did include historic preservation, Los Altos Creek Trail and daylighting, Guadalupe Park River, the role of San Jose State University, livable neighborhoods, regional perspectives, community benefits agreements, evaluating projects through the lens of the dignity of working families, and the potential impacts of high-speed rail on the Gardner neighborhood. So those are the TED Talks. We had a report out on the housing solution group. Again, it was a very preliminary report out just to give you a high-level sense of what was talked about. Again, the meeting is tomorrow to dive a little bit deeper and to talk through some of those potential solutions and outcomes and help prioritize those. So very quick snapshot there of what we talked about. Anything that might have been missed or anything you all want to talk about that we didn't cover here that was happened last week? No? Or a week and a half ago? Feels like yesterday. So the engagement process update, we just want to give you a very quick snapshot. We did go have 4 forums, very well attended, as we talked a little about last time. We're putting those into a summary. We're also summarizing the pop-up workshop, or 2 that we had. We're also planning pop-up workshops coming up either the end of this month or early next month. We're also going to be distributing a survey, hopefully this month as well, a mobile survey that we talked a little about in the past. And we're also going to be doing some stakeholder meetings with groups. So all that is coming. And we're also hoping to have that FAQ available by the end of this week. And that will be emailed out to all you all. We put up on the website for everyone to have access to, really covering a lot of the questions we've been hearing throughout this process to give you a visual tool. And definitely, if there's any questions that come up from that, please definitely let us know. And we'll have Lori's email address available for that. So, TED Talk, not going to happen. Close your eyes. You'll see this maybe next week. Okay, so report backs. We're going to go ahead and get started with those. Again, we're going to give a very quick high-level introduction, giving a summary of what was heard, but we really want to open it up for a discussion with you all. So we're going to start with Kim and the report out. I'll cover this real quick. So again, very high level. We'll just mainly the shared understandings and the desired outcomes that came out of those groups. We want to discuss really what those overlaps are. We sense that there is a lot of overlap between the different topics. So we're going to start to talk about that a little bit today and really kind of work, not necessarily working toward consensus, but trying to understand where some of those main tension points are. And we'll be taking active notes, and that'll all help us move toward the next meeting where we're going to be talking holistically about all of these topics. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kim.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I am Kim Wallish, Deputy City Manager, and it was really a pleasure to be able to work with this group, which was a small group of awesome people. We had a really long name: Parks, Public Space, Sustainability, and Neighborhood Quality of Life. And I'm just going to read the names. If you could just raise your hand, just so everybody here has a sense of who is in the group. So Harvey Darnell, Norma Camacho, Teresa Alvarado, Sandra Weber, Edward Somm, Leslie Hamilton, Bill Souders, Kathy Sutherland, Laura Winter, and we had Matt from Greenbelt add on. Is that everybody in the group? And we had a robust audience watch both of our meetings. So you should have in front of you the summary of our work product that we put together, and I'm just going to hit on a few highlights. And my goal is just to summarize the main points from the group, and then after that, I'll ask the group if there's anything that you want to add in terms of adding any flavor to it, and then we're happy to take any questions. So we had some high-level overall themes. The first was that how important it was to take a cohesive and holistic approach to public space planning over this entire area, and to avoid a piecemeal approach. We saw a huge opportunity here for really attractive, usable, active, inviting, accessible to all public spaces that are well connected to each other. We saw opportunities to take things that are currently issues and problems for the people, especially people that are in this neighborhood or pass through it, and to turn them into innovative solutions and new strategies, and particularly the opportunity to take areas that are today experienced as problematic or unsafe or dead zones and really turn those around into attractive spaces. And then the last high-level idea was that the Diridon Station area really becomes a dynamic, world-class regional hub that has connections not just to the nearby neighborhoods and the downtowns, but to really the protected open space network in the broader city or region. So really sort of a big vision of a hub which is connected out to the network. And then we identified 5 main topics that the group wanted to comment on. And the report goes into more detail, but I'm going to hit some of the highlights here. So the first, as you might expect, is parks and open spaces. And the two key points were really looking for a range of different kinds of public spaces, including perhaps some innovative kinds of public spaces like rooftops, plaza parks, pocket parks, linear parks. And then secondly, the emphasis on well-designed and well-maintained public spaces. That was hit over and over again. The example perhaps of the Rotary Play Garden in terms of high-quality design, high-quality maintenance. The second main topic was connections and trails. And it was very interesting. This group said many, many times, the issue is not that we need new, large open spaces. We have many of those in and around this area. Our main issue is the connections to the existing amenities and assets in the area, especially connections by bike and walking. So you see the theme here, range of desirable bike pedestrian options, including off-street trails and multi-purpose green fingers. Now, you might wonder what a green finger is. I did too, and then I recalled in the original Diridon Station area plan, I'm going to send this around, there was this notion of these green fingers, which were really pedestrian connections that were attractive and that connected larger public spaces to neighborhoods and smaller spaces. So I'm just going to send this around for you to take a look at. A lot of emphasis on connecting to downtown, to Willow Glen, to other nearby neighborhoods, and to the regional park and open space network, and that especially the Guadalupe River and the Los Gatos Creek trails can really become jewels within the open space system. The third area that this group focused on was public art and heritage, and we linked those two. We said that public art and historic and heritage resources need to be integrated into the design and the character of this area from the very beginning. The group envisioned artwork that is permanent, but also some artwork that might change over time or be of a temporary nature, and that it's not just about the physical heritage, but that historic populations who have lived and worked in the area, such as the Ohlone or other significant figures, should also be acknowledged and respected. The third main topic area was impacts to existing neighborhoods. So we talked about the appropriate interface needing to happen between higher density buildings and existing neighborhoods. There's some concerns about noise pollution, especially in the Delmas area, that need to be understood better, and some problem solving around that. There's a lot of interest in early activations of public space, which could be a variety of things, but let's start now. Let's not wait 10 or 15 years. The expectation of, to the extent possible, there will be mitigation for the increased traffic impacts that will come from more development and more transit service in the areas, and a lot of openness to continue to collaboration on new modal strategies, which includes things like scooters and bike share and different ways of moving around. Then the last main topic area is funding and partnership strategies. The group sees opportunity for very strong partnerships with the nearby neighborhoods especially. That could start now. People from those neighborhoods said, we'd be very interested in volunteering and organizing to take better care of the places that we have now. And there was actually people from the Parks Department who said, we'll take you up on that. So there were some good connections. So the idea of leveraging existing neighborhood involvement, neighborhood or corporate or other volunteers, and really seeking some big partners in corporate and philanthropy to make this happen. So those were the desired outcomes. And then the group came up with a long list of potential solutions. Okay. And actually decided to use SurveyMonkey and to rank the solutions that they came up with. But the first thing that they did was they divided, they had nearly 40 solutions, so we had a lot of great brainstorming. We divided those into two categories. So the first category we called major capital solutions. These are the things that would require very significant investment and very significant lead planning time and implementation time. We had 8 of those, and so we had most of the members, I think not 9 of you, most people were able to vote. And what you see on the slide here is these are the top 5 major capital solutions in terms of the group's initial prioritization. So they include making sure that there's a Diridon Central Plaza that's a signature plaza, which they envisioned on Santa Clara Street. That would be, the place that people would gather pre and post events at SAP Center and just other community gathering space. Number 2 was to make sure you connect the Guadalupe River and Los Gatos Creek trail systems as they go under 280 so that pedestrian bike connection can be safer. And so it can integrate with the broader Three Creeks trail system. Third was the idea of daylighting Los Gatos Creek. And the group can say more about that, but that seemed both for access, safe access reasons, as well as for potential habitat improvement reasons. Number 4, better connections so that the existing residents and visitors can get to the existing parks and open spaces that are already there and are very underutilized. The people who live there feel isolated from the amenities that are there because the connections are not great. And then number 5, make the 280 Bird overpass safer for walkers, bikers, including children. We've talked about that one before. So those are the top 5 major capital. And then we had over 25 other ideas that we called nearer term solutions. So these are things that are less expensive and could be implemented earlier. And what you see on the slide here are the ideas that got at least 3 votes each. So this was our natural break point. So the first one, a lot of interest in saving and showcasing the set of neon and historic signs that were from San Jose businesses, roughly from the late 40s into the early 70s. The Stevens Meat Market Dancing Pig sign is the one we all know of, but there are a number of others that are reflective of that era, and there's interest in preserving them and perhaps showcasing them in the Diridon area. Number 2, solution, again, here you see this constant theme of improving key pedestrian and bicycle connections, including under the 87 freeway into the downtown core to areas like the Children's Discovery Museum, really, but all around, really 360 around Diridon. Third, a lot of interest in employing early activation and programming for residents, and I would say and visitors, right, throughout the planning and construction phases. And there were a lot of great ideas here about pop-up retail, food trucks, kids activities, maybe even virtual reality experiences where people could go to Diridon and understand what the history was and also what it's going to look like in the future. And the fourth was the importance of developing a comprehensive list of historic resources in the Diridon area so we can make sure to pay attention and preserve those. And then last, we had a set of ideas that were really good ideas, but to us when we looked at the group's product, they seemed like they were guiding principles for new development, whether it's Google development or other development in the Diridon Station area. I think I won't comment on them, but I'll just read them. And there were 9 of those. Design all streets as complete streets with multimodal connections for bikes, peds, and traffic calming. Restore and creatively reuse historic resources. Comprehensively integrate public art into design from the beginning, into buildings, streets, and open spaces. Use public art and landscaping to draw people along, invite them in and draw them along. Use green fingers of parks and open space as catalysts for new development. Avoid creating dead zones of inactivity. We have scary, problematic spots because we didn't give this too much thought in the past, so let's try to avoid those dead zones through better design and other methods. 6, scale new development appropriately where it interfaces with existing development. 7, use the nearby neighborhoods as test beds for new ideas. 8, ensure that new buildings provide more eyes on the new and existing parks. Don't bury or hide the parks and public spaces. And 9, integrate open spaces into places where people will and do live and work currently and will do more so in the future. So just to conclude, we had a lot of, I think, good agreement in this group about what was important, and some consistency with work that had been done in the past through the Good Neighbor Committee and the Deer Down Station Area Plan. So some validation of that, and then some movement into some new directions. So that concludes the overview, and I think what I'm supposed to do next is we'd like to open it up, maybe first to other members of the committee. Is there anything I didn't get quite right, or you would like to emphasize or explain? Please do.
Matt Vanderslice here with Greenbelt Alliance. Thank you for that summary. I thought that captured many of the high points that we talked about. In particular, this idea of connectivity, of the Deerdon being a hub that is connected in many, many different ways with both the creeks, with the trails, that can connect you to open spaces and park amenities that are nearby, as well as in this regional context of being able to connect to regionally important open spaces, places like Coyote Valley, which is San Jose's kind of preeminent open space area that could be further protected and be an amenity for this regionally significant hub here, in ways that might also be able to be connected to some of the mitigation needs of the project itself, like VMT and other environmental impacts. So I think that sense of seeing this as a regional grounding point that connects to many other amenities at the local and larger scale is mostly captured here, and just want to emphasize that as we move forward.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, Harvey?
Harvey Darnell, North Woodland Neighborhood Association. I know somewhere along the line I voiced a concern within the group that depending on how we send high-speed rail through the area, whether it's around the Gardner neighborhood or through the middle of the Gardner North Woodland neighborhoods, we could potentially lose an existing or a piece of an existing park. And I'd like to reflect that in that we do not, as a group, and I see Kathy shaking her head, yes, the four neighborhoods surrounding the project sent a letter to the council members and the mayor about 2 weeks ago, unanimously saying that we wanted it, the routing of the high-speed rail around the neighborhoods, so as to avoid taking parks and taking homes. So I want it reflected not only in the transportation group, but also in this one.
Yeah, I can note that.
Okay.
Note that in our.
The other thing is, just this is a logistic question. I didn't see the original SurveyMonkey request, and when I saw the results, I went out and I did the SurveyMonkey, and I sent Lori an email, and she said, oh, well, I couldn't see who voted. Well, aren't we under Brown Act? And so that voting probably is a problem under SurveyMonkey if it's anonymous.
Well, we could look into that.
Yeah,
I think the
I'm
important point was that as many people
I'm just
vote
thinking,
as
as we're
possible.
moving forward,
one
if we have
time.
to ever do this again,
Yeah.
it may be something that you have to use a different tool.
Yeah, thanks, Harvey. We'll go down the line here with Bill and then with Leslie.
Thank you. I'm Bill Souders from the San Jose Downtown Residents Association. And I'm not really adding things. I'd just like to emphasize a few things, if I may, from the conversation. So you did a good job of summarizing, Kim. When we talk about green fingers, I just want to remind everyone that we were also talking about possible continuation of the Paseo, because it stops at Cesar Chavez. So if it continued all the way down to Deerdon, that could be a big win. The other thing is, when we talk about the interface between the old neighborhoods and the high-density neighborhoods, I would like to make sure, and I've said this before, that we're taking advantage of some of the work that's already being done around public life. So, it's the space between the buildings, so let's not lose sight of the work that's already being done there. And then finally, the emphasis on bigger partners in the project overall. It's not just going to be Google who is going to be bringing their treasure and talent to the area. So if you look at, I keep referring back to the High Line, the sort of philanthropic investment in the High Line and other investments in general in support of an operation like that should try to be, I think we can copy it in some meaningful ways.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And we are taking notes down actively here. We'll incorporate this into the next round. So we'll go to Leslie and then over to Teresa.
Thank you, I agree, Kim. Nice job on the summary. I'd just like to offer a suggestion on the survey results, that we have some ranked voting. Right now, 1, 2, 3 each have a 1 value rather than, say, it seems to me that if you rank something 1, it maybe should have a 3 versus 2. And then the ranking comes out much stronger than for the number 1, which is the Diridon Plaza. But then you have number 2, Stay Lighting the Creek, and then tied for 3 are connecting Los Gatos Creek and providing better connection. So I just thought that maybe a bit different way of looking at the ranking.
Yeah, we could try doing kind of the weighted ranking and see what changes. Happy to do that.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Teresa?
Yeah, San Jose is updating its downtown design guidelines, and I think it's important to incorporate there be an urban design standard for buildings that are built adjacent to the river or a park, to take full advantage of those park assets and make sure that they're providing public access to those resources as well. And to Bill's point about the High Line, requiring that development along parks and the river contribute to ongoing operation and maintenance of those assets.
Teresa, can you just remind everyone name and
Oh,
organization,
I'm so
please?
sorry. Teresa Alvarado Whisper.
Thank you very much. Kathy?
Kathy Sutherland with Delmas Park. And this is one of those small things, but I think it makes a huge difference. Public restrooms in parks are essential. I think that's one of the best things that happens at the Rotary Play Garden, is there are safe public restrooms. So as we start looking at park space within these large areas, I think that needs to be one of the things that's considered.
Thank you, Kathy. Edward, you're up.
For the summary, one thing that I wanted to mention, kind of the context that had us bring up the idea of the variety of scales was obviously the current plan has, the fire training facility was originally destined to be a large park. And one thing where kind of two of our points came together was, it's not that we need substantial large parks, there are substantial large parks all around. Access to those is just as important, and then therefore, okay, we're not going to get a single large park within Diridon, so then let's divide that up throughout the area. So kind of those 2 points tied in together, that we were losing a 5-acre parcel, but let's scatter that throughout and help mitigate that by connecting to what we already have.
Thank you, Edward. I don't think I see anyone else from that group with the card up. Should we shift now to the larger group? If you all have any specific issues or concerns with the points that were raised or want to make any additions, this would be your chance to do that before we move on to the transportation group. So anyone have any input there? Jeffrey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, Jeffrey Buchanan with Working Partnerships USA. So in terms of the exploration of funding sources, I think it's important to note staff is already doing some good work looking at funding for infrastructure, an infrastructure fee for commercial development, for instance. So it'd be good for, I think, the notes of this group to reflect, you know, there's that ongoing staff work, and I think it makes a lot of sense to connect some of these big capital projects on the list here, possibly to that funding source going forward. So I'd encourage that. And then just as we think about residential development in the area, certainly in the downtown area, we've seen a number of fee breaks for parks. Given this kind of weighty list of capital improvements to the park system, I think we may want to consider recommending that we don't extend those kinds of fee breaks to, you know, additional developments going forward, particularly in the Diridon area, given the kind of significant expectations for park development in the area.
Great, thank you, Jeffrey. I don't see any other name tags up, so if that's it, we're going to go ahead and transition. Thank you very much, Kim.
Great.
We're going to go ahead and transition now to the transportation topic. And welcome, Bill.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Bill Hecker with the Office of Economic Development. I'm the city's Diridon project manager, and I'm filling in for Lauren Haley, who's decided she was going to go to Ohio in the summer, and so you get me instead. And I will note, just for the record, I've done this for years. I end up following Kim in presentations, and I hate it. She's much more engaging than I. She was good and had the names of everybody that was on the group introduce themselves, and she read that. So I'm going to go the other way and say, if you were on the transportation subgroup, if you would raise your hand so you can be acknowledged, and then we'll have a way to move around as we move forward. Thank you. It felt like there were a lot more of you when we were meeting. Sure. Okay. And two, I will be very quick to go through this and try to stay at a very high level so that we can move this on to discussion, because I do think what you will begin to see from these conversations is a tremendous amount of overlap, which I think we'd all hope to see moving forward. So we ended up with a handful of desired outcomes. I think that, to me, the takeaway, and I won't read them all to you, the main takeaway is there is a tension between wanting to have enough success and enough density so that you get the volumes of people moving through, competing with what do you do with the volumes of people that are trying to move through the area in cars and other means of transportation. And that also then leads to the next discussion, or the next topic is, what do you do about the need for parking? Surprisingly, the arena was interested in parking, and anyway, we had big discussions about how do you right-size parking, and I think that's one of the ongoing discussion topics that there will be going forward. I think it's important as well that we think about, and a constant theme both in the prior group and this, is the ability to have connections into and through the area, not just for cars and buses or whatever, but for people and moving people in all ways, shapes, and form. It's critical, this whole issue of bike and pedestrian connections is an essential part of the transportation program in and through the Diridon station. It was reiterated multiple times by all of the committee members and the public that this is an area that we really want to be able to focus on, take advantage of the green fingers that showed up in the last presentation and that show up as part of the Diridon plan, and really find a way to enhance the experience for people moving through the area and to the area. Tremendous concern about safety, especially as volumes of traffic begin to rise up, and also the existing conditions of people moving through neighborhoods. We will hear it time and again a lot of concern about people having to move, especially children having to move across Interstate 280 to access recreational facilities and schools. How do we solve that? It's part of the transportation problems as much as it is parks and open space and other uses that have to go into the solution. And then again, as I said, parking, I think the big takeaway is we want to right-size it. We want to build the right amount of parking so that the area is successful, that we don't damage the neighborhoods that are abutting it, but we don't want to build so much parking that the transit never gets used. Again, traffic congestion and circulation, there's not much more to say to this other than it's again, the things that we want to pay attention to. We don't want to build more road capacity. It's like building freeways. You don't want to just keep building lanes of traffic. You want to find ways to be smart about how you move people through the area. A little bit more specifics on the east and west and north-south. Again, it's important to be able to move people into the area, and I think there's a general sense out of the group that what we don't want to do is just have people blow through the area. We don't want people to just rush through the area by building large roads. We want people to actually use it and become part of the neighborhood. Transit is a critical part of what we're going to be doing in the area, and it just needs to be well coordinated and well funded. Neighborhood impacts, could not emphasize this enough, that we want to be cautious about how we do development and the improvements that we make. There's some concern, and rightfully so, about as congestion begins to increase, the cleverness of technology looks for alternative ways to move people around, and some of those alternate routes end up moving people through residential neighborhoods, and we want to avoid those sorts of impacts, inadvertent impacts of new development on the abutting neighborhoods. And with that, I will turn it over to the members of the Solutions Group to provide their input and anything that I missed in my very brief statements. I'm better than I thought I was. Harvey. Harvey.
Again, this is not as much aimed towards the MOU as towards the later project with the high-speed rail, but we want to make sure that any alignment of the high-speed rail does not close off the intersections of Osiré, West Virginia, and also have any impact on taking of houses. I want to make sure that is highlighted.
Thank you. Other comments from the working group? If not, I'll open it up to the general. Leslie.
Hi, good evening. Leslie Corsilia with Silicon Valley at Home. I just wanted to mention a few things again. You said there's overlap, and there was a little overlap between this and the next group that you will be talking about. But I really wanted to focus on the future proofing, which I think is really important, because parking right now, we're parking for today, and tomorrow's going to be different. We just don't know what's going to happen with driverless cars and other things. And so having that plan for some adaptive reuse is really important. And the other thing that I would suggest is looking at ways to encourage developers to provide transit subsidies for their properties to encourage transit use as well. To avoid having to park everybody there. And that's something that especially affordable housing has done quite well in providing VTA passes or other encouragement to cars.
Thank you. I don't see any other vertical signs. Matthew. Matt, I think you won.
Thanks. Matt Vanderslice with Greenbelt Alliance. I would love to absolutely echo everything that Leslie just said there. I think, in particular, as we look at the cost for housing development, that the more parking that we're requiring, the higher the costs are for housing. So to be able to unlock opportunities for the sort of mixed-use environment with new homes integrated with new commercial development, we definitely need to be focusing on ways that we can minimize the parking burden that we're placing on providers of new homes, particularly affordable homes. And I think that we've seen that parking is the number one inducement of driving patterns. It's free and available parking induces the travel patterns that we're trying to shift away from. So I would strongly lean on the side of right-sizing the parking supply to meet our mobility, our multimodal goals, rather than simply planning for the past and recreating the past. And I think that will be challenging here as we look at the rubs with existing uses, and I think we just need to be bold about that and present a strong agenda around prioritizing multimodal outcomes over the housing cars rather than people, and particularly as we look at techniques like unbundling, requiring unbundling of parking as one of the strategies that we could emphasize here in this plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeffrey?
Yeah, just I'd like to reiterate Leslie's point on the eco-pass idea. VTA right now is undergoing some budget troubles, so anything we can do to promote, be it residential or commercial developers buying into the eco-pass program, there's a lot of benefits there. And then just on the transportation demand management idea, I think it's important to note that a lot of times in TDMs, for instance, the TDM that Google has in Mountain View, while it's extending transportation options oftentimes to its directly employed workers, a lot of the subcontracted service workers don't have access to some of the same range of transportation options within the TDM. And, as we've talked about in this committee, these are low-income folks that are most likely to be facing more pressures. They have to move further and further out away from their jobs at this point. So trying to ensure that any approach to TDMs, particularly with Google, addresses these service contract workers' needs to access some of these alternatives, like the shuttle system or access to passes, to hopefully reduce some of those miles that are likely to be generated.
Thank you. Nathan?
Thank you. Nathan Ho, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Appreciate the work and the report out of this subcommittee. And it made me think, transportation, access, and traffic. It just sounds so sexy in a way, but really I think of vibrancy. I think of built environment that it's good to incentivize around current transit modes. But also to think about how we build those roads, or if we don't build those roads. So we think about the station area, that the best way to dissuade car traffic is not to build a road in a certain area, build it around and have walking or biking or scootering or whatever other type of modes through the area. So I think that some of this encompasses it in terms of intersections are crossable and safe. But I was up in San Francisco last month, and I saw some of the work that they're doing around crosswalks, where the crosswalks are, it seems they're a good 50% wider than most crosswalks I've been in, and the curb cuts for going into the crosswalks actually extend out into the street, so that cars aren't zooming around that corner, but because they have to work their way around it. And so it's thinking about, as we build our infrastructure, what are we building it for? Are we building it for roads? Are we building it for people? And understanding that it's not just cars that will be here in the future.
Thank you. Anybody else want to go before Harvey goes again? Okay, Harvey.
One of the comments earlier about PTA triggered something that I asked for, and unfortunately, we did not have a member on the committee from VTA, so we couldn't really have a full discussion on it. But one of the things that was most impressive to me of the slides of the European stations that we saw is they separated the bus traffic and the public transit, bus and taxis, I guess it was, from all the other traffic. And so I wanted to see if we could reflect that we, at best practice, we would like to see that as well incorporated into the Dearborn station, multi-level.
Glad to take that away to the designers of that project.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, I got one. We got second time around here.
Sorry, Jeff's comment inspired me as well. Thinking about the Mountain View example, where trip caps were a really powerful tool to be able to encourage the types of mobility patterns that you're looking for and create the innovative race to the top approach. The Stanford campus is similar, where a cap was set on the number of trips by car that could occur, and that's led to all sorts of innovations in terms of shuttles for employees, incentives for walking and biking. It unlocks opportunities for development and encourages innovation at the same time. So this seems like the perfect sort of opportunity to test something big and bold like that. And then the other is exploring opportunities for VMT offsets. If there are ways in which we could achieve flexibility around that so that we can pull VMT off of other parcels of land where we don't want to see development, that might be a way to address some of the VMT issues with a development of this scale.
Great, thanks for the ideas. John?
John Pettigo Pact. One of the things that when I had looked at who's riding bikes, a lot of folks that are riding bikes are often low-wage workers, Spanish-speaking low-wage workers, and if there's going to be employment work, if people are coming from the east side into that downtown area, just so that there's adequate parking for bikes and the passage through downtown, if we can figure out that if we're going to be having a lot of traffic coming out of certain areas, just to anticipate that is certain areas of the east side may also need to kind of look at what kind of bike paths and safe bike passages there would need to be as well.
Super, thank you. I'll get out of here. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. So we're going to go ahead and transition now to land use and urban design, and Matt will help lead that discussion. And I'll remind you, at the end of this topic, we'll kind of come back and loop back around to talk through maybe some of the commonalities that we saw out of this discussion tonight, maybe some of the discrepancies between the different topics, and we could have a discussion overall about that as well. You're up, Matt.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. So I'm gonna follow Bill's lead, and with land use and urban design, if folks who participated could either at one or both of the meetings could raise their hand, that would be great. Raise them high, okay. Thank you. So both of these are tough acts to follow, especially Kim. And so I actually, because she was, I decided to wear her badge, hoping to actually get some good energy here from her. So I'm going to give a quick summary here, but let me start out with some of the high-level conversation and some of the results that we had. The first was that, through all of the conversations that the group met twice, and through all of the conversations, the Diridon Station Area Plan is really a great document, and there was sort of a lot of the comments that people were making were really reflected in that document. And so there was a recognition throughout all of it that the DSAP is a good document. It needs to be updated, but it's a great starting point, and all of the work that was put into that should really be preserved and not just kind of pushed aside. The second point that I wanted to make was there was a lot of overlap from our group compared to the other groups. And I think we could see that with parking and parks and open space. And I think after this, we'll have a conversation about, where is the overlap and where are the tension points. The third high-level point is that we didn't, I think we were going to vote, but then sort of when we came in part of the vote about what the priorities were, but when we got through it, it became pretty clear, at least to me, that a lot of the recommendations are not things that are necessarily going to cost money, but they are just ways of designing and part of the process. And I think there are certainly some things that will cost that have a dollar value, but a lot of it is just making sure that the design of both the Google development as well as the entire Diridon Station area, that it's just designed in the right way, and that will actually address some of the land use and design concerns. So at the high level, we talked about, in terms of topics, we divided our topics into land use, urban design, building heights, which is part of urban design, parking, historic preservation, and then impacts of development. And I'll walk through these quickly. But as an overall vision, there was consensus that the area should be a vibrant, walkable neighborhood with a coherent development pattern. There was a sense that, a very clear sense that no one wants to see this as a series of insular buildings or as just a series of buildings that aren't connected to one another. This should really create a vibrant place. It should capitalize on the unique characteristics of the area, of the history of the area. It should be an extension of downtown. It shouldn't be a separate, it shouldn't feel separate, but it really should be an extension. And it really should have a human scale to the design. So again, human scale, I heard through the other groups, is really one of the common themes, pedestrian orientation, high quality design, and human scale design. For land use, one of the conversations that we talked about quite a bit was the mix of uses. With the Diridon Station Area Plan, one of the central, the cornerstones of that plan was the San Jose A's Park. And that clearly is not happening. And so there was sort of a question about, what are the best uses in different areas. And there was actually some disagreement in the group, not arguing disagreement, but I think there were some slight differences of opinion about what the best uses would be or should be around the transit station, whether it should be office primarily office or whether there should be a mix of office, retail, and housing. And then there was also conversation about on the south side of the Iridon Station area, whether office was appropriate or whether it should just be residential with some retail. So, I think that's something that probably will need to get worked out a little bit. The second point with land use was the desire to make sure that the businesses coming in have an open and permeable campus. And I actually think that of all of the points, and I'm editorializing here, so you guys can all disagree later, but this I think was one of the points that came across, and there was a lot of agreement that people don't want to see an insular campus. They want the activity spread out onto the street. They want the people who are working in the buildings out shopping and out meeting. They want to be able to pass through and not have it feel like a walled-off campus, similar to like Pixar in Emeryville or the new Apple campus. They want it to feel like a district and feel like a city. And there's, of course, a tension there between the needs of the individual businesses. But there was definitely a desire to have that open and permeable campus. There was a conversation about retail and how retail should be integrated and where that retail should be located, and a concern that the area would get over-retailed, so that there would be ground floor retail on every building, and that would essentially spread the energy, and it really should be focused in more limited areas. There were other conversations around land use, around value capture, if there's an increase in zoning that's provided on the housing needs, and then overall a desire to update the Iridon Station area plan after this work is done. It does need to be updated to reflect some of the changes, but overall it's a very stable document. The next topic is urban design. The main points that came out of this were the desire to create a really interesting and attractive pedestrian experience in the area, to create a beautiful new neighborhood within the city, or new neighborhoods. The blocks that are in some places rather large now should be divided and create more walkable blocks. The new development should be, some of the new development where possible should be oriented towards the Guadalupe River Park. And so this comment came up earlier in the Parks and Open Space about orienting buildings and taking advantage of parks and open spaces and not turning their back on them. And one of the commonalities that came up in the land use and urban design group compared to the others was the relationship between land use and design and the transportation system. And even though the charge was land use and urban design, there was still a lot of conversation about transportation and integrating transportation. The next topic that we talked about was building heights. This, I would actually say, there were a couple main points that came out of this. One was a desire to sort of maximize height everywhere and not have just a consistent kind of blocky building roof line, consistent roof line across the whole area. And there should be some variation in building heights. The other, which I'm a little afraid to get into, Nancy Klein is here somewhere, and she can talk about the airport and the actual height of the buildings and the regulation. But there was, I would say, more of a sort of asking questions and understanding what the maximum allowed heights are now and the possibility of that changing. And my takeaway from all of it is it could change, but we don't know yet. And so the baseline now is the current maximum building heights, because it is all determined in this area really by the airport and the airport land use overlays. I hope I got that right, Nancy and others. Thank you. Okay. We did spend quite a bit of time also talking about parking and the relationship between parking, land use, and urban design. And some of the points that came out earlier are points that this group made, potentially because there was consistency of thought and potentially because it was some of the same folks. So one was concerned that too much land is going to be dedicated to parking. So minimize the amount of land that's dedicated to parking. There were recommendations that that parking should be in individual structures, not necessarily integrated with the buildings themselves, and that allows for an easier sharing of parking, shared parking. And also, buildings should be designed in order to allow for conversion of parking, assuming in the future less parking will be needed with autonomous vehicles. So if it's in a separate building, it can be repurposed or rebuilt as something else without actually changing the whole building. So shared parking was really one of the critical topics, especially for the SAP Center, and it seemed like there was a lot of support for shared parking in the area, especially given the different the timing of the different activities that could be going on. Next was historic preservation. Historic preservation is a really integral part of the design character of the area, and so there was a recommendation to preserve the significant historic structures and the unique characteristics of the area. So it isn't necessarily just about if it's on the National or State Register, you know, preserve it, and if it's not, you can get rid of it. It's about actually thinking more holistically about history and integrating history in with the future design of the area. And so I think a recommendation that more work really needed to be done on not just historic resources, but also the cultural resources in the area, and a need to conduct a historic resources inventory to make sure that those buildings that are really critical are preserved, but also that there should be the, you know, again, part of the thought process of thinking about the history of the area and the character and bringing that through as new development happens and as sort of a new district and a new area is created where the old one exists now. Finally, there were some conversations about the impacts of development and you know, concerns and about how new development would impact existing neighborhoods. There was a recommendation that either Google or the city conduct an equity analysis to really understand with the development that's happening, both Google as well as the larger Diridon area, about who's really benefiting from that and whether the benefits are sort of equitably distributed. Noise was also a concern, as well as construction and the impacts of construction on existing neighborhoods, as well as new people who are moving in. It is a large area. There could be a lot of development happening over a long period of time, which could lead to impacts from construction over a generation. So there was concern about that. And also, finally, a recommendation to monitor the alignment of high-speed rail through the area for the impacts on the land use and design character of the area. And that, I believe, is my summary. Why don't we start with the Land Use and Urban Design Committee members, and you all can add or tell me where I went astray. All right. Start on my left. Edward, you're first. We'll just move around.
Thank you, Matt, for the being very detailed. We covered a lot of ground, and like you said, in some instances, it wasn't necessarily arguing as there was more than one side to allow the discussion, which I think was important. One thing to kind of riff on some of the things that was said there, the insular campus and kind of engaging the campus and the surroundings, there's kind of was two schools of thought. The typical school of thought you hear about a lot of these corporate entities where they'll incorporate a cafeteria, incorporate amenities into their developments for their employees. And what started as a conversation of, well, can we have those also be open to the public, very quickly, and I think appropriately turned to, what if we look at it the other way? Existing local businesses that then create some kind of arrangement with the employers so that these local existing businesses get these employees visiting it, rather than these new businesses being brought in and then, oh, we'll let the public come in too. So let it, kind of an extension of the existing fabric being maintained, existing businesses become an amenity rather than amenities created whole cloth.
Yes. Kathy?
Thank you. Kathy Sutherland, Delmas Park. Thank you for the great information and summarizing everything. One of the things that I think of when I think of Google coming into the neighborhood is that Google's going to hire an amazing architect, and they're going to make it look incredible. And I just would like it to be felt that everybody is there to experience the amazing architecture and that it's welcoming to the larger community. So when I think of Google as a development and what it's going to look like, I see all kinds of exciting things happening basically within their campus, but I see that and I hope that it will be open to all and welcoming to all.
Norma?
Thank you. Norma Camacho, Santa Clara Valley Water District. One thing we just touched upon but really didn't get into in the land use discussion is really the incorporation of green infrastructure into the design of these new facilities, and also stormwater capture systems being an integral part of this new development. There's a lot of options like green roofs that can be incorporated as well to add not only real healthy, sustainable development, but also adds a lot of interest in greenery and kind of extends those fingers upward and just not outwards. And so that's something to consider as well. And also for consideration too is incorporating these stormwater capture devices we should have I guess a goal of not to exacerbate, urban stormwater runoff in the areas. As you intensify and you put more hardened asphalts, more buildings, you don't want to send more contaminated water into the creeks. And so something to consider, and hopefully we can incorporate those ideas or thoughts as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie?
Hi, Leslie Corsilia, Silicon Valley at Home. We did talk about the existing Diridon plan, but I certainly expressed and came away by saying that I think we need to have a lot more housing that's in that plan now and a lot more affordable housing, and I didn't see that up there. So you might not think of zoning for affordable housing as being a land use because you don't zone for affordable or market rate housing, but you can require a certain percentage be affordable in a plan area, and you can also look at different kinds of housing types that may be more naturally affordable by being smaller, other kinds of things. And so for that reason, there's one comment that's on page 12 that talks about housing needs. I don't think that this had those points in it, but it also says attempt to match new housing with the needs. And I guess I would like a little stronger word that it would be really desirable and important to try to make sure that the housing needs are matching the needs of the community there. And then the last thing that I would say on the retail piece, because we did talk quite a bit about this, and it's important that we not put retail in places where it doesn't make sense. It needs to be walkable retail, and it becomes a huge impact on housing developers to have retail as a part of their project, especially affordable developers, because it's not part of the affordable housing finance. You can't use affordable housing funds for retail. So we want to make sure that it is where it needs to be, because retail is going to be really important there, but not that it's just a standard requirement of all development. It needs to be in the right places.
Thank you. Can you actually clarify the page 12 comments so that everybody has that?
Sure. Under F on page 12, it says housing needs attempt to match new housing, and I just thought that it could be a little bit of a stronger word, that it was more of a thoughtful process to look at what the needs are going to be. And perhaps that goes a little bit to the equity conversation of looking at the demographics and looking at what the needs may be and being just more thoughtful about that.
Great. Teresa?
Yeah, also, it could be here under historic preservation, but I recall us talking about, in terms of retail, really emphasizing homegrown retail versus kind of national chains, and making sure that we're reflecting the unique character of San Jose within this district, and supporting, obviously, local businesses. Teresa Alvarado Whisper.
Great. All right, we'll keep going around. Bill?
Bill Souders, Downtown Residents Association. Thank you, Matt. The thing I guess I'm still a bit concerned about is we keep talking about building heights, and we're not ever sure when we're going to have some resolution there. As someone who spends a lot of time in San Francisco, obviously it's a completely different scenario, but the skyline is fantastic. And I know that a lot of people want to maximize the usefulness of the volume of the space there. But having something like that hat law that they have in San Francisco, I don't know what the implications of that are, and I don't know who's analyzing what that's going to look like when we get into the development agreement phase with Google, which is coming up fairly quickly. So I guess it's more of a question than a comment. What is it going to take for us to understand what the implications will be of our height limitations and how architecturally significant we can make that area?
Okay, so just to sort of clarify or figure out in the process where it's going to happen so that there isn't the negative impact of just consistency.
We all agree that we would like to see some variety, and you just referenced Google spending money on a great architect, which I believe is probably true. But if our building height is such that it won't pencil, what are the implications of that, and when will we know that?
All right. Okay, let's open it up to comments, and unless staff has any answers to that question. I do. All right, come on up. Grab a microphone.
Just want everybody to know, it's called the Downtown Height Limitation Study, and there has been an extraordinary amount of very, very technical work that has been going on for about 6 months with the oversight of an advisory group and in partnership with the airport, as well as conversations with some of the major airlines using our airport. And we are on track and planning to have an initial report out from that work at the City Council Community and Economic Development Committee in September. So they meet probably the last Monday in September. So we're getting close to having some answers. A huge amount of complexity and technical work being done, but we're trying to get to the bottom line as quickly as possible about could there be some areas over the Diridon area where a higher height could be allowed, and we could still have safe departures from the airport for the airlines that use that western corridor in case of emergency.
Thank you.
So September.
Okay, are there other comments from committee members or recommendations? Okay, I'm going to start this way since Harvey has not had a chance to speak yet. We can start with Harvey.
It's reminiscent of a time in a meeting I was with Mayor Reed, and I was 26 members of the community, and he said, "Harvey, it's been 50 minutes. I've never been in a meeting where you haven't spoken for 50 minutes." Thank you. One of the things, and I'm not sure where we plug this in, is a concern that I know I've raised along the way, and I don't remember which committee I raised it on and whether it got reflected in our report, but it certainly does reflect on land use, is that I have a lot of friends who are afraid to go downtown. There's a perception that there are not enough eyes on the street, that it's not activated enough, that the housing is separated from the clubs and et cetera, and so there's just not a lot of throughput and bodies on the street at least 18 hours a day. So the question is, as we're doing the land use, I want to make sure that we really think this through, that we don't silo the commercial, silo the offices, silo the housing, and keep them so separate that it doesn't feel safe to walk through the neighborhood.
I think that was the intent of part of the conversation that we had, so that wouldn't happen.
but I didn't hear.
Yeah. Okay, next. John.
John Pettigo, PACT. Can the members explain a little bit more about the equity analysis? I really like the idea of an equity analysis to understand the impacts, and how are you thinking of doing that? And I'm not sure who, and it was going over very quickly, but I like that idea, and I like Leslie's comments about that we ought to be thinking of a higher volume of housing.
Any of the members want to talk about the equity analysis? No one? I mean, it came up, I'll answer since you all aren't. I think it came up quickly, and I think one of the reasons it's not fleshed out is because it wasn't discussed in a huge amount of detail. It came up at our first meeting as a recommendation that overall we need to make sure that all of the topics are thinking about equity, and when we're talking about land use, that should be part of the conversation. And so I think it's just a starting point for that conversation without much detail. So there isn't anything more than what that I think what was said than is what is in here, but it certainly is something that needs to be explored, and I think other groups have talked about it as well. Does anyone want to add? No? Okay. Other, Kevin, go ahead.
Thank you. This is more of a general comment for all of the solution groups that we've heard tonight. What we're doing here in the station area, I would like to see the same principles extended to the surrounding neighborhoods. So, we have kind of from time to time kind of mumbled at the end of these things, oh yeah, we want to do this or that to protect existing parks or existing houses, but I think we need to start making some fairly strong statements that we are going to protect the housing in the surrounding neighborhoods and the parks in the surrounding neighborhoods, and protect the connectivity that's within the existing neighborhoods in specifics, like we were talking about earlier, the West Virginia Ozarray situation with a high-speed rail, and also the aspect of historic preservation for all of these neighborhoods as well. And I think we're missing an opportunity to make some bolder, stronger statements to include the surrounding neighborhoods into this, to make sure that we're not just talking about the station area, but what's good for the station area is good for the surrounding neighborhoods and is also good for all of San Jose. I don't know if I said, Kevin Chrisman, great Gardner Neighborhood Association, after all
Kevin.
that.
Okay.
I don't have as much experience as Harvey at this, so you have to bear with me.
And other members can respond to this as well, so people on the committee. Seeing none, though. Jeffrey.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comments. Joe Buchanan, Working Partnerships. Appreciate the comments about value capture. I think it's really important as we think about particularly the Google project, the amount of upzoning that's going to be needed. We've had a couple of references here to the height study. Every foot you increase the allowable height on the property, both the publicly purchased property or the privately acquired property, that's value that the city is giving to private entities in terms of increasing the value of their property. And so I know Matt started by saying these are solutions that we can do that won't cost anything, but it is, in fact, something where the public will be giving financial value to private entities, and we need to be considerate about how do we take steps to capture that value. Because right now, when you look at things like the land that's owned by SARA, they have to sell that at the face value today, knowing full well that tomorrow it'll be upzoned. And so there's not really a public policy, anything that the city has on the books right now to capture that value. And so that's why it's so important, I think, we think about things like community benefits agreements, particularly when you think about the large amount of land that's actually zoned for public, quasi-public purchase or purposes right now within these properties that are in the exclusive negotiating agreement with Google. And so, public, quasi-public uses, that's for things like schools, colleges, homeless shelters, libraries. That's purely public land for public purpose. And so when we sell a piece of land today that's quasi-public, and then later convert it to whatever kind of commercial, mixed use, whatever it is that Google seeks to do with that property, that's the public giving up not only a key public resource, but then giving a substantial increase in the value of that property to that company. And so we need to think about how to capture that value. And again, I think the community benefits agreement framework is a good one that we should continue to look at. The second piece, I just kind of build on Leslie's comments, and also a comment I think Nicole had mentioned in the last meeting. When we think about the housing needs in the area, thinking not just about those directly employed workers that are going to work within this complex that Google is hoping to build, but also those service subcontract workers who oftentimes are making wages where they're not able to really afford housing here. And so thinking about their needs in both the how we plan in the area and in how we think about capturing the value of some of these land use changes that Google's going to make, be it around affordable housing or even things like job standards, which we'll get into next round. But thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. Oh, Matt. Either one. Boris.
Okay. I'll go first, but Matt, I'll let you come after me. Boris Lipkin with High Speed Rail. I know the kind of approach into Diridon has been discussed a few times, and I just wanted to clarify a few things. We have looked at a variety of ways to bring the system into San Jose. And as part of that, we have had a lot of conversations with the community and gotten a lot of feedback on that. And I just wanted to reiterate that we're very much looking for ways to bring high-speed rail while minimizing some of the impacts, including not having to close things, West Virginia or Azuray. So I just wanted to make sure that we're responsive. We have done a lot of work in this area, and we're going to continue to do that, including engaging with, the surrounding neighborhoods as well. So more to come, but I just want to make sure that I had a chance to respond to some of those comments.
Matt Vanderslice, Greenbelt Alliance. Something of just a clarifying question. Under the potential solutions for parking, it says, it calls for recognizing the existing parking strategies in the existing Diridon Station Area Plan, and then has a number of other discussions of positive parking policies. And I would love to know more about the conversation around that recognition of existing parking strategies. It seems like the Station Area Plan has some important strategies, and to achieve the city's goal for overall VMT reduction, we're going to need to significantly build upon the set of strategies that are in the existing plan and go beyond what was achieved in 2014. So if there's more discussion of how that particular bullet point was framed, that'd be helpful to know.
Go ahead, Edward.
Shasta Hanchett Park Neighborhood Association. I think where that came up was the rep for SAP Center pointed out that in the Diridon Station Area Plan, lots of research and lots of effort was put into figuring out parking strategies. And I think the request was that the previous work and the previous legwork that had been done not get thrown out, that it basically be considered. And I think that kind of everybody took that to heart and said, okay, there are good things within the Diridon Station Area Plan, but there was lots of conversation back and forth that shouldn't be a limiting factor. It also shouldn't be wholesale abandoned. So I think that was, as much as anything else, just an acknowledgement that a large tenant within the area like SAP has parking concerns. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly what was in the Diridon Station Area Plan before, but we need to think about how their needs can be met with whatever we do moving forward, I think is where that point came from.
And I think it did echo the larger point of the recognition of the Diridon Station Area Plan and all of the work that's been done. Looking back, it's 4 years later from when it was completed, started, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. So, things have changed, but it doesn't mean that everything has changed, right? And so change what needs to be changed and recognize the work that's been done and pull that forward without throwing everything away. All right, any other land use or design comments?
Okay, well done, Matt. So as we suggested before, I'll stay here. You stay here, great, excellent. So there was a lot of commonalities that came out as we were talking, obviously. We talked a lot about human scale, sorry. We talked about integration with the campus, with the surrounding. We heard a lot about sustainability and green infrastructure that came up between the parks and the land use topics. Obviously, the transit integration with the land use was a big piece as well. So there's a lot of commonalities that came out. Maybe we'll start there. Is there any others that you all noticed that we want to kind of highlight here as these three topics that we talked about, noticing that we do have the jobs one, as you mentioned, Jeffrey, and there's going to be stuff that pops up in the jobs that might correlate with some of these as well. Any other commonalities that we want to discuss or highlight right now, just to kind of see how these topics are integrated potentially as we move to the next phase of developing the report and maybe prioritizing all of these topics together? Or did I just do a fantastic job of summarizing that on my own? Yes, Edward.
Edward Zahn, Shasta Park Neighborhood Association. From what Dave was saying, it actually ties back in with what Kevin had said. I think there's one thing that was a commonality, at least in the two groups I was in, was that there are both lessons that have already been learned by the adjacent neighborhoods, and there are potentials for positive things that happen within the Durand Station to have a positive effect on the neighborhood. So I think kind of that's one thing. A lot of the concerns that got mentioned in these groups are maybe lessons that whether positive or negatives that have been learned by the neighborhoods. And so the ability to address that in the Durand Station area, I think will, by definition, have a positive effect on the adjacent neighborhoods as well.
Great. Thank you, Edward. And I forgot to mention just real quick for the public, the next section of the agenda is actually going to be public comment. So if you do have a comment, you want to fill out a comment card, turn it in, that would be fantastic. You could just leave it there at the front desk. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Kathy.
Thank you. Kathy Sutherland, Delmas Park. One of the most interesting conversations I thought we had was about what is historic and what is art. And the group we were in, I can't remember which one it was, but we were thinking, we were having this discussion because a lot of the things that we want to preserve, whether the neon signs was the key thing, they don't necessarily qualify as being art or historic. So how do we relieve ourselves from these burdens of traditional definitions to be able to work within this area to make it lively and exciting and to reflect some of the things that we want to see?
Great. Great point, Kathy. Thank you. Matt, is that your card that's up? Nope. Any other? Yes.
Derek Seaver with the San Jose Downtown Association. I think the one that, really kind of stood out for us, and it stood out in all three of the report outs, was the idea of connectivity and the integration, as you mentioned. I think in the parks, talked about overcoming existing barriers is featured prominently in the transportation report out. And then in land use, talking about the extension of the downtown core and not a separate neighborhood. The downtown core, we certainly feel has a lot of momentum right now, and part of the danger of a process like this is it kind of shifts the center of gravity to the west side of downtown, but that emphasis on connectivity is certainly exciting from our perspective because that makes this an enhancement to that momentum and certainly not something that could slow it down. So I think that emphasis we would love to see remain going forward.
Great point. Thank you very much. Anything else there? We could transition. Anything that you see that's conflicting, maybe? It seemed like it was all very, very much synergetic to me, but is there anything that might be conflicting that you all want to point out from these topics? Anything pop out that you particularly hate? No? Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Kathy, you have one that you hate?
You can call me Harvey, too.
We'll start with you, Kathy, and then go down the line. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think there will be further discussion about south of San Carlos and whether or not that should stay as a residential neighborhood or whether there is going to be the ability to develop large commercial buildings there, because that is the neighborhood area of Delmas Park, or one of the strong neighborhood areas of Delmas Park, and whether or not you should have 8-story commercial development within a residential neighborhood, existing neighborhood. I think that we're going to have a conversation about that.
Sure. So understanding impacts. Thanks, Kathy. Laura?
Laura Winter, St. Leo's neighborhood. Kind of taking off on what
Edward mentioned about the surrounding neighborhoods, I noticed in the transportation solution group, I want to make sure we don't forget the arena traffic and parking management plan as it relates to protecting the surrounding neighborhoods. As a member of the Arena Oversight Committee, don't want to even mention how many years ago that was, over 25. The neighborhoods put a lot of work working with the Sharks organization and Streets and Traffic Redevelopment Agency, and it's a document that still works really well today, and I think it could be a really valuable tool moving forward.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we definitely want to remember those resources that are out there. Norma?
Norma Camacho, Santa Clara Valley Water District. When you talked about conflicts, I could already see that with the types of aspirations we have, that the existing land use policies and regulations are really going to be a conflict in trying to achieve what we're trying to achieve in this new development process. So it's something that we should look at very early on.
Great point. Thank you, Norma. Yes, Teresa?
Teresa Alvarado Whisper. I think we really, through all of them, we are hearing that we want to fix all the ills of our previous land use planning, everything that we've done wrong. We want to accentuate our assets, and we want to, if this is going to be really a transformational project, we got to think transformatively in terms of how we are approaching it, really from an integrated standpoint, changing all of our design standards, changing the physical landscape, the circulation, all of it. I just feel like it was such a great response. People are willing and open to think big and just wholesale change.
Great, thank you, Teresa. A holistic approach. I don't see any other comments. We can come back to this after the public comment if we need to, because we have plenty of time here tonight. But I'm going to go ahead now, open it up for public comment, and go over here and grab the comment cards. Okay. Looks like so far we have 3, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and be ready to pop up. So we're going to start with Richard Wong, then go to Larry Ames.
Well, distinguished committee, my name is Richard Wong. I'm District 3 Neighborhood Commissioner. What I would like to hear from the committee is a little bit more about a topic that I value a lot, which is emergency measure. Been working on that for a little while, and I'd like to comment. I mean, in order for us to have a vibrant, design for the future, we need to consider about neighborhoods. We need to consider about what are the plans that we need to focus on in a case of emergency. And I think that that's a big topic. Just want to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Next up is Larry, and then followed by Jeremy Taylor.
So Larry Ames, and I'm just very impressed with all the results here. It's so pleased with all the results that you have. So glad to hear you talk about the Los Gatos Creek Trail and the Guadalupe River Trail and the daylighting of the Los Gatos. I'm so glad that you have that in there. The bike and pedestrian access to connections. I'm glad you're talking about including the historic buildings and resources. And by the way, at one of the meetings I mentioned the Los Gatos, the nearby Willow Glen Trestle. It is still standing right now. I'm glad to hear you talk about the sustainable and green design and social equity. One comment, though, I take exception to a comment there. The bicycling is not just for the low-wage workers and the homeless. It's also for high-wage workers as well. I mean, like when I was in aerospace engineering, a number of us were biking to work. It was a great way to clear the mind and get the blood moving in the morning. It was like a mini vacation. It was a great way to get away from the computers. It's also part of the Envision 2040 to change the reduce the vehicle miles traveled and reduce the mode shift. People, we are environmentally sensitive. We don't want to burn oil and get traffic congestion. But anyhow, so overall, I'm very excited with this. I'm looking forward to seeing it develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Next up is Jeremy Taylor, followed by Diana Salazar.
The single most important neighborhood to Google may very well be Gardner neighborhood. We're full of historic homes with huge lots, about 8,000 square feet, walking distance to both downtown San Jose and downtown Willow Glen. For anyone who does not know where Gardner is, if you're looking at a map where 87 and 280 cross, we are the triangle below. If you've ever read the Welcome to Willow Glen sign, we are the area to the left. Google should start focusing on Gardner neighborhood now and not wait until the office comes. When Google comes to San Jose, your employees are going to look first at Gardner neighborhood, the gateway to Willow Glen, to move into and build new homes. Google will take over Gardner, which we're well aware of, but I bet that Google has no idea how in shambles Gardner is today. Gardner is considered by some to be a dumping grounds for San Jose. We've been largely ignored to the point that some would say that we're even an orphan neighborhood. We're at risk of losing homes to high-speed rail. There's a surge in theft and vehicle break-ins. We have homeless all over the freeways, and in fact, my next-door neighbor has a homeless person sleeping outside of her window. Our park is so neglected, you can't run on a park field without worrying about breaking an ankle. Our school needs a lot of help. And our most recent burden is a new 50-foot cell phone tower smack dab in the middle of our neighborhood. To paint the picture, we literally have a road so bad, a speeding car flipped over. Oh, and did I mention that we regularly get rival gangs tagging graffiti from different neighborhoods in San Jose? Gardner neighborhood is not ready for Google. Google should work proactively to make our neighborhood better now, so it's ready for your employees in the future. Google should seek out leaders in the Gardner neighborhood to understand what needs to be done. If Google only works with the city, the right improvements won't be made, and in the end, your employees will not be happy. If Google wants to make Gardner a great place for its employees, you need to start working on it now. Otherwise, your employees are going to have a lot of complaints about the housing opportunities in the future. Together, Google and Gardner can make Gardner great again.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next up is Diana Salazar, followed by Shawnee Kleinhaus.
Short people problems. Good evening, my name is Diana Salazar. I'm an organizer at Sacred Heart Community Service. Our agency has been around San Jose for about 50 years, and we've historically been a direct service organization. We have a pantry, clothes closet. Essentially, our mission is to eliminate poverty. And so in the last few years, we've been really actually getting involved at a deeper level around the political process, community organizing. And so right now, our members, we serve about 80,000 folks every year at our agency. And right now, a large number of our members are deeply concerned about what's going on right now. Unfortunately, right now, this is not the best time for working class families to come out here and give comment, but we are involved in the process. We are coming out to the community meetings that you all had in the East Side, and I myself haven't been able to come lately, but I'm here right now because I could finally come to this meeting. And so one of the things that we are really concerned about is schools. So what's going to happen to a lot of the neighboring schools in the area, particularly Lowell, Gardner, as it was mentioned, a lot of them are fearing that they're going to be displaced and the school might be closed down. So that's something that we've been trying to work to address. The other thing that has been said a lot, and we can continue talking about, is housing. We have been really involved in passing renter protections because our members are really feeling that, the housing crisis. And unfortunately, the mayor and a few other council members have consistently let down renters. And so we are really worried right now, even with this process, how whatever decisions are made, how is it going to be enforced? Because a lot of our members feel discouraged by the process because they either don't feel heard, or when they come out, there's really no way of what is going to be the accountability measure. How are we going to make sure that the things that you've heard, the stories that people have been sharing, the courage that it takes to come and tell you, I feel that I will not have a house, what's going to happen after that? So that's one of the things that we want to make sure is centered. especially since, if I remember correctly from the last time I was here, about half of the folks that are within a quarter mile or maybe a mile are renters, and or maybe two-thirds actually, and about half are people of color, more specifically Latinos. And yet, we should ask ourselves, have we heard their voices? What are they saying? And I know that this is not the only space to share that concern, but I do want to make sure that we value people as much as we've been talking about the environment. That's why I want to say yes to the social equity analysis, right? How is it that we do CEQAs, but we don't do a CEQA-ish thing about people? Like, how are people going to be here to even enjoy the benefits of all the things that we're passing for? I'm originally from Oregon, so I love trails. Don't get me wrong. Don't come after me after this. Like, I'm all for public transportation. I'm all for protecting the environment. But we also want to make sure that that does not cause displacement for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Next up, we have Shawnee, followed by Brian Grayson.
Good evening. I'm Shawnee Kleinhaus with Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. A couple of times ago, Joe Van Bellingham from Google came to talk about the triple bottom line, and one of the things he mentioned was nature. And that, to me, was very refreshing. I said that here. It's nice to hear of a big company and a big project like this that actually looking at nature, and not only part of nature, which is sustainability, not only looking at what helps the people, but looking at nature as a whole, a much more comprehensive view. Today, nobody mentioned that. In previous meetings, some of you mentioned the beavers, others mentioned birds, others mentioned other things that are really important, and not just parks, because a park could be a concrete plaza. It doesn't have nature, it activates people, it's very nice, but it does not include something that people really need. And when you look at nature, you have to think about some of the design implications of what that does mean. Maybe you need to look at light pollution and minimize that. Maybe you want to consider bird-safe design that does not cause birds to crash into glass towers. I think Google takes those things into consideration, but I think the plan as a whole needs to look at that and think about nature not only as sustainability that serves people. Yes, we want the trail, we want to daylight the creek, all these things, but specifically looking at nature and the wildlife and the birds and the beavers has value. People connect to them, they connect to art, but when the beavers were there a few years ago, that became big news in San Jose. And so these are things we don't want to leave behind and don't want to forget, and it seems like Google did not forget them, but in this discussion, they did not come through. So please do not assume that just by protecting parks and creating connectivity, that takes care of nature. Please specify what nature means. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawnee. We have Brian Grayson, followed by Roland and Stephanie Cooper.
Brian Grayson, Preservation Action Council. Not surprising to you, I imagine, to tell you that I was pleased to hear how often historic preservation, historic resources, signs, things like that came up in the discussion tonight from the solutions groups. So even, and I may have mentioned in the past, that even though historic preservation is not represented officially on the panel, it's good to know that obviously it's something of importance and concern to many of you on there, and so thank you for making sure it stays above ground and we move forward on it. And I think the common thread that we're seeing is that we're all here trying to save something, whether it be historic resources, housing, parks, trails. There's a common thread there that we're all trying to save those kinds of things. And so I appreciate your efforts on that and look forward to that being conveyed clearly when it gets to City Council as well. Also was mentioned, I think Kathy mentioned about the signs and that they don't fall under the appropriate definitions, and that's true. The dancing pig sign, which has come up on more than one occasion, is a good bad example of that. It is not considered public art, so therefore it doesn't qualify for any kind of funding in that respect. That won't be the only time that comes up. There's so many of the signs that are hitting that historic mark, either from their long-term, just here in San Jose and what they represent, or they may be at the 50-year mark, and there may be other aspects. We have, I think there's only one in San Jose that's even landmarked, Others that should be or could be are not. City resources don't allow for it at this point, and so the potential of losing those is great. So please keep that in mind as you have your conversations. I mean, since there is that interest in them, if you want to save them, you're going to have to help, because we need to get changes in definitions so that they're properly reviewed and protected in San Jose. And right now, it's a struggle. It's ongoing, and we're going to keep at it, and we hope you'll be helping as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Ron?
Thank you. So what I want to talk about is a little bit, there was a lot of good conversation about the great separation at Osiré and, movements across the tracks. But I've actually looked at Osiré about 18 months ago and when it would take to grade separated, and the collateral damage was beyond belief. So at that point, you've really got to start thinking about other ways to approach the problem. And how could you possibly close it, but at the end of the day end up with something better than what we have now? So potentially you could think of closing it off to vehicular traffic and have a really, vibrant retail, people across the street, coming across, bikes and peds, and reroute the vehicular traffic over the San Carlos overpass. And how would you possibly go across the tracks? Well, guess what? We just built this brand new, beautiful Los Gatos bridge, over the creek. So maybe that would be a way for the pedestrians to go. So potentially we could get better outcome. And then there's a lot of discussion about, we're going to lift everything up 20 or 30 feet. Now start thinking, do you really want freight and high-speed rail to be 20 to 30 feet up in the air so that the entire neighborhood can hear it from 1 mile either side of it? Probably not. And then what happens when you lift the tracks? What happens to the San Carlos overpass? Well, you're going to hit it. So what you then do with San Carlos, you're going to take San Carlos back at grade. Now start thinking about the impact of that would have on the creek. And in closing, there was this really good discussion about how you can separate bikes and peds from the buses and the vehicular traffic. And as you know, in Europe, you would actually lift the pedestrians one story, and then it's just basically pedestrians milling all over the place and shopping, eating and dining or whatever, totally ignoring what's going on down there with the Ubers and the buses and everything else. And then, last sentence, and then you start thinking, well, maybe what we should do is to also move the people above the tracks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Last up is Stephanie Cooper.
I'm Stephanie Cooper, resident of Willow Glen, many affiliations, one of which is Trev's Trekkers, a group of hikers who frequently use the trail system here. They will be thrilled to hear about the plans for connecting everything up. We like to do 3 to 5 to 8 mile hikes, and especially when it's raining. The ideal is the paved trails on Los Gatos and Guadalupe and Coyote and so forth. As an individual, I've been trying to transition into using public transportation more and more wherever I can. I can go all the way up to San Francisco and back. And the most dangerous part of my journey is the quarter-mile walk from Tamian to my home. And so I'm very much concerned as an individual about paying attention to the dead zones. As a person who's aging, the toilets are important. I really care about that. I love walking the trails. I wish I could feel safe walking them by myself instead of always with my group. But there are situations along the trails that make me feel unsafe doing it on my own. Most of them, it's our unhoused community. On the other hand, as a person who's in the business of working with human souls, I realize how important it is for the unhoused to have access to what little precious bit of nature they can. If I were homeless, I would want to live along the river too. So I would give up being able to hike by myself in order to find a way to integrate our unhoused community into our overall community. That's very important to me. And the last thing I want to say is that I know you're doing it, I just haven't heard it out loud. When you're taking into consideration your designs, please consider not only the 30-something, 6-foot-tall male, but the little old lady that I am becoming.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you, as always, for your great comments. Very thoughtful. We are now going to transition to the final piece of tonight's agenda, and I'm going to hand it over to Lori.
I was trying to save paper there at the end. So we didn't have much time between the last one and this meeting, but the next one won't be till August 13th, so there will be a few weeks before we'll meet again here. Luckily, this one went a little bit short, so you can get home sooner. That graphic is hard to see here. And tomorrow we have the Housing Solution Group, the third meeting, so it is the only solution group that is scheduled to meet 3 times. As we know from last meeting, there's just a lot of ground to cover. It's a really complex issue. It's the top concern that we've been hearing through this process. So we'll continue that discussion and then come back on August 13th to get the report back from the housing and the job solution groups. So that'll be the bulk of that meeting. We have a few other things that we're planning for as well. Then on the August 29th, the 8th meeting, we'll be coming back to you with a summary of all the public feedback we've been collecting from the other events. That's not to say that you'll have to wait that long to get a glimpse of that, but we're just still working on preparing those documents. So we'll get those out to you as soon as we can, but also recognizing that at the August 29th meeting, we'll get a chance to discuss that and highlight the key themes from it. And also at that meeting, you'll get a chance to once again talk about all the overlap and commonalities and tension points between all 5 topic areas. So we'll be wrapping up this round of outreach, focusing on the potential Google development, starting in August. And then in September, we'll come back with a draft report that documents everything that you've been all saying as well as the public. So next meeting, we'll have more detail about what that report will look like. But we just wanted to give you a heads up that we're planning on introducing it at the next meeting, but there'll be more opportunity as over these next few meetings to really dive into that final product. And then the last thing on that list is that as the emphasis on Google winds down, there'll be the emphasis on the Diridon Station Integrated Concept Plan ramping up. So this fall, we'll be doing a lot more specific outreach related to getting Diridon Station to fit even more transit services and riders. So we'll be focusing a lot of the September meeting on that project and process. So before I move on to that, does anyone have any questions about the schedule? I know we still have TBD for the September meeting, so we're still trying to figure that out, but we'll keep you in the loop on that. Oh, Matt, sorry.
Hi, Matt with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. What do you envision as the kind of the back and forth for reviewing the draft report? How long will that period be? Do we take it home and look at it, send our red lines to you, or what's that going to look like?
We are planning to do as much of that iteration as possible. We haven't quite figured it out exactly, but for example, on August 13th, we'd have at least an outline of that for you to look at. And with the draft coming out, the full draft coming out in September, it would be at least a week or 2 to review. So obviously, the more time, the better. And I'll be thinking of that in terms of timing and the how to get input. But in general, sending it out in advance. Did you have any other specific thoughts on that, or?
Well, are we going to be
are we going to be going back and forth at this table, talking to each other about what we think should happen, kind of debating the issues at all? We're trying to explain it to each other even more in depth than our TED Talk or anything like that?
Yeah, so in terms of so I thought you were talking more about the actual product, but in terms of getting at some further discussion on the key issues, the August 20, well, actually the next two meetings, there'll be a lot of that opportunity of around the table, and we're thinking about the possibility of breaking into smaller groups to be able to get into more of that discussion. But yeah, definitely more talk at these meetings.
Kevin, you're up.
More just a general comment. Kevin Chrisman, Gardner Neighborhood Association. I've been very pleased with the amount and quality of the interaction with Google in our neighborhood so far, and I am looking forward to more conversations in the future. I think that came up in the public comment that I didn't want to have anybody get the idea that you're not listening to the neighborhoods, because all the neighborhoods that I've talked to in the area, not just Gardner, have been very pleased with how things have been going. So thank you for, I know a lot of time and effort that went into interfacing with a tremendous number of neighborhoods, not just Gardner.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll go to Jeffrey and then Teresa.
Yeah, I think Matthew kind of touched on my comment, but just to say, question to staff, I mean, how are we thinking about, like, so far, I think we're seeing kind of a cafeteria-style approach to a lot of these different topic areas, and I appreciate the breadth and the kind of depth of the conversation. But, you know, at a certain point, even, you know, with the cafeteria-style approach, there's your desserts and there's your entrees, and so how are we thinking about trying to parse these conversations and to get at, you know, what are the issues that are kind of most core, that are, maybe the most important, and how do we think about the kind of different sets of responsibilities? So for some items, you know, it may be city policy or area-wide policy that's most appropriate, and for other things, there's, you know, particularly, you know, acute impacts of a project of the scale of Google's that maybe it wouldn't make sense to wrap that same kind of set of analysis and responsibilities around a smaller developer with kind of less impact. So how do we kind of take what's been a really robust conversation and narrow it down into something meaningful that the city council can actually wrap its hands around and Google can wrap its hands around? Because right now, it's kind of like, you know, to the public or someone who just picked up this document, it's like puppy dogs and rainbows and all the rest of it. And there are a lot of great ideas, but how do we, as a group, and realize it's tough with a group this large, get to something meaningful and actually, you know, feel like we can actually push forward with an agenda that we come out of this with?
I see who wants to take that one.
I don't really. This is more of my, the end report is more of my project. So we've had that same question as well on the staff side, quite frankly. We spent, not last week, but the week before, as a team, you know, everyone that you've met here, about half a day with Kip Harkness, kind of walking through kind of a design thinking framework to help us kind of get at some of those questions and what this was going to look at. And, you know, two things became abundantly clear, which, you know, we had talked about early on, is how we prioritize and how we move things forward, not having you guys need to make choices between, say, neighborhoods and housing displacement, or, you know, quite frankly, land use versus transportation was really going to be important. So I do think the solution groups that you guys are in, the things that you guys have talked about, why it might be kind of a cafeteria approach thus far, I think all of those things will move forward in some way in those buckets. So you're likely to see in the report that comes forward, and what Lori and I are going to be doing is you'll get a memo from Lori and I probably like in the next 2 or 3 weeks to kind of outline this, so you'll see something not of substance but of structure and kind of the why it's this way, the what it's going to be, and the how it'll work, so that we can have more of a robust conversation. I say the meat of the issue is, where do those things go, Jeffrey? And I'd say we're still trying to figure some of that out, because if we look at all those things tonight, you know, 40-something things that talked about, some of it is totally applicable for Kim and Nancy as they go into negotiations on the MOU with Google, like, you know, in the next few weeks. Some of that is going to be, more applicable to Boris and our Department of Transportation as they work through high-speed rail issues. So us kind of getting this report and starting to frame out what goes where, and then how this group is continually involved in that is going to be really important, because this is kind of, just remember, the first hurdle in a long number of hurdles that this group needs to do. While it's been somewhat of a sprint thus far. So how we divide that report up and kind of where goes what, hopefully we'll have more of an idea when we come back to you in 3 weeks on that. But it is kind of something that we're continually thinking about. Teresa?
Yeah, Teresa Alvarado Whisper. As more food for thought, on August 1st, I wanted to invite members of the SAG. We are going to be hosting Scott Kratz, who's the executive director of the 11th Street Bridge Project in Washington, D.C., and it's a project that is going to be linking two neighborhoods with a physical bridge over the Anacostia River, and they've done a ton of work around these two neighborhoods, which are very different socioeconomically, and thinking ahead about gentrification and displacement. They've created an equitable development plan for their project, and they will be updating it even before he arrives here on August 1st. So we're hosting him from 5 to 7 p.m. on Wednesday, August 1st at Makla. Obviously, we will have limited space, but if anyone is interested, please email me, or you can email grp@spur.org. We're really excited about hearing about their work. They've done hundreds of community outreach meetings and really heavily engaged process to make sure that the neighbors who are participating will benefit from the improvements in their neighborhood.
Great, thank you, Teresa. Those resources are huge, so thank you for bringing those to the forefront. Bill, you're next.
Thank you. Thanks, Larry. Bill Souders from the Downtown Residents Association. I think I raised this question at the last meeting as well. Kim, you weren't here, but I think you got delegated supplying us with an FAQ document, and it was basically around what happens at the end of what is described here as Phase 3. So kind of what you were just saying, I think a lot of us are not really sure not only what happens next, but are we reconstituted as a group? Do we stay intact? And all of those kinds of things. So what happens after September? And for me in particular, we talk about, the market represented by builders and developers and Google. You've got city and regional agencies, and then you've got community benefits. And it's not clear to me how the community benefit agreements and those things would come together.
Yeah, so good question. Kim is working on a FAQ document that I think we will hopefully have posted by the end of the week on diridonsj.org. And I think what we can do is also just email it to the entire group by the end of the week, so Laurie will do that, so you have that. This group goes for a long time. So after September, Bill, you signed up for a lot more meetings. They're not going to be every 3 weeks or every 8 days like we just did to you, with a variety of subcommittees within subcommittees. But knowing all the things that are going to happen in Diridon, and quite frankly, at BART, VTA, high-speed rail are three things that we keep on talking about. But based off of what happens with Google, there could be other steps that we want to take and other conversations. And Jeffrey's absolutely right. There's other companies thinking about Diridon other than just Google, and how do we look at that area as a whole. So there could be a lot more follow-up, but this will start to go more into a regular, less intense flow. But the group is envisioned by the council and by staff to be together for quite some time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Jeffrey, did you have a follow-up question? No? Okay, no problem. I think we've made it to the end of our agenda, if there aren't any other questions.
Just a reminder for the public where you can send written comments to. And yeah, there's our website, so stay tuned. So meeting adjourned at 8:10. Thank you.